Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the second day of the conference, the first full day of discussion sessions. Delighted to have this opportunity to have a fireside chat with Chairman Behnam. We're going to get right into it because we only have, believe it or not, only 15 minutes. Just a quick backdrop on Chairman Behnam. He is currently serving as the 15th chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Obviously, all of us in this room have been keenly interested what potential oversight and direction of our market looks like from the CFTC standpoint. So without further ado, welcome. Thank you for coming to AMA.
Yeah, good to be here.
First question, prior to Executive Order 14030 on climate-related financial risk, which President Biden issued in 2021, financial regulators in the U.S., aside from you, really took an interest in climate change and its impact on financial markets. How did you become interested in climate-related financial risk aspects of financial markets, including voluntary carbon markets?
Craig, thanks. It's good to be here in Anaheim. So before I started at the CFTC, and just for folks, the CFTC, we're a market regulator. We're one of two market regulators in the U.S. government, and we obviously regulate commodities. We regulate commodity derivatives, and we're starting to see a growth in the voluntary carbon offset space, but we have a number of renewable energy contracts and different contracts that are being listed by our registered exchanges, which I think is very exciting and a clear indication of how the market's shifting and where risk management, I think, lies in the future. But for me personally, I came to the CFTC in 2017 as a commissioner, and then I became chairman when President Biden won the election in 2020. And in 2018 and 2019, I started thinking about climate and the relationship between climate change and financial market risk. And as I'm sure many of you know, a bit of work had been done overseas, but not domestically, as you mentioned, Craig. And prior to coming to the CFTC, I had worked in the Senate on the Senate Agriculture Committee. So been around production agriculture, been around conservation and different commodity programs, and just obviously seeing the natural impact of climate and agriculture, and just starting to tie a lot of different data points that I had experienced professionally. And given my role at the CFTC then, I thought, we should be thinking about the intersection between climate change and financial markets. And obviously, it goes without saying the impacts that these extreme weather events have been having on agriculture, on financial institutions, on lending, and obviously it continues to happen at a pretty steady clip. So we were very lucky and fortunate to put together a group of about 30 or 35 practitioners from really a wide range of the market, banks, exchanges, clearinghouses, but a lot of environmental groups and academics. And we put out a report in 2020, Managing Climate Risk in the U.S. Financial System. And it was, it was something I'm very proud of, but it is very comprehensive in scope. Bob Litterman was the chairman of that committee, who some of you may know. And they just did a really fantastic job. And obviously what was very unique at the time, to your point about the executive order, the political dynamics have obviously changed. So back in 2019 and 2020, it was pretty unique to put that out. But something I'm really proud of. It got a lot of very positive attention, and I think is being used as really a benchmark. There were 53 recommendations for financial regulators across the report. So something that's very commonly used, and I think has been a nice groundwork for future policy.
Great. Many of these people in the room may have responded to a request for information that you folks put out last year. Obviously such a fascinating response that you ended up doing a 60-day extension. Can you comment on the status of the Commission's evaluation of those comments, including if and when the CFTC intends to respond formally to the comments received?
Yeah, so last June, so 9 months ago, we had a convening at the Commission, mostly on voluntary carbon markets. I'm sure a number of you were there, or at least your organizations were there. And really, it was my thought as chair and seeing the direction that the administration was going on climate, what could we do at the CFTC to have an impact to start to convene folks and think about what our rules and our regulations and what we're seeing in our markets. And this really was a product of the product innovation. And what I mean by that is starting to see new listed contracts on our regulated exchanges around climate, right? Whether it was the carbon offset contracts that we're seeing on multiple exchanges, or a number of other contracts around renewable energy. And it was, in my view, a very interesting exercise because there was a clear demonstration, I think, and hunger for clear policy and more rules of the road. And I am sure, it depends what the rules are. The devil is in the details. But clearly, especially on the carbon offset side, seeing the scaling of the markets and seeing the issues around integrity and the quality issues, there's a clear desire, in my view, to see some sort of policy put into place, notwithstanding what we've had at the regional level with the compliance market. So we put out a request for information, and it's been quite successful. We had, I think, about 30 questions, a dozen or so different topic areas. We had about 80 responses. And my general philosophy is, want to do this on a consensus basis. We really want to get a wide range of opinions and do something that we can, get support for. So we've largely gone through the comments, and we're going to hopefully get something out in the next few months, probably closer to the summer Q3, that we could sort of use as a launching pad for future policy ideas. But a lot of positive reactions, a lot of questions around data, about stress testing, about disclosures, and what we could do, especially in the VCM space.
Great. Well, I know the audience is going to be looking forward to that release, and I know from speaking for many of the companies and individuals here, we're interested in remaining cooperative as we can be and seeing where this goes. There's clearly been a lot of action in this market lately, and we're all riding the beginning of the wave, if you will.
Yeah, that's right.
Market participants trade a range of derivatives referencing or related to carbon, market commodities, including futures, opinions, and swaps. These actions are taken for a variety of reasons, including to raise capital and manage risk. What are the CFTC's key concerns around the use of derivatives?
So, this really goes to the heart of probably why I'm here and the reason we're interested in these markets. As I've mentioned a couple times, we have listed carbon offset contracts on a few of our exchanges. And as I pointed out, and I'll get down to the 101 just in case some don't know, but derivatives contracts are financial contracts whose price is derived from an underlying commodity, right? So historically, I said I worked on the Agriculture Committee, and the reason is because the CFTC actually used to be a part of the Department of Agriculture because the origins of futures markets were really just traditional agricultural commodities. The markets have evolved over many decades, and you have energy contracts, you have metals contracts, you have financial futures as well, interest rates, currencies, and credit, just to name a few. And where we are now is the CFTC only regulates these derivatives, but we do have this very unique authority for the underlying cash market, right? So we don't regulate a cash transaction between a grain elevator and a farmer who's buying or selling corn or soybeans or anything in the metal space, or if you go down to Texas, and we don't regulate cash transactions of natural gas or crude oil. But if there is suspected fraud or manipulation in that cash market, we do have enforcement authority. We're a civil enforcement agency. We bring a number of enforcement cases against institutions or individuals who violate our law. And this authority is quite powerful. It's limited, but it's powerful in the sense that if there is fraud or manipulation in a cash market transaction, there's going to be a correlated price reference in the markets we regulate, right? So if there's a fraudulent price in the cash, you're going to likely see a correlated price in the futures market, which I regulate. So we do bring a number of cases in cash markets in something that is probably a little bit outside of the space of this audience, but we've seen the development of crypto markets over the past 10 or 15 years. And we brought a number of cases in the crypto market, even though we don't have authority in the actual crypto space because of this cash market authority. So if that makes any sense, point being is with carbon offset contracts listed on my exchange, if there is fraud or manipulation in the underlying VCM market, which references the contracts I list, then we could bring an enforcement action. So this really goes to the heart of what's my responsibility as chair and the responsibility of the CFTC to ensure that the contracts that we regulate have integrity and are free from fraud and manipulation and are truly representative of supply and demand. So this was really the impetus and the genesis of why I think it was very important for us to see this market and oversee it. But as I said, we don't oversee the cash markets, but with these listed contracts on our regulated markets, we actually have a vested interest and a regulatory interest in the cash side. I can explain that more if you need to. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but trying to just kind of give a sense of why I'm here and why this matters to us.
Well, I followed it. I'm not a financial guy, so let me ask actually a follow-on from that. You've clearly, as you mentioned, been looking at carbon offset contracts. In the grand scheme of things, though, the voluntary carbon market in particular is relatively small in comparison to the other commodity markets you look at. How do you view that in terms of the priority for the CFTC at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, but knowing the issues around climate change and we heard this on the previous panel, the sort of demand and the need for scaling these markets in an appropriate way where the markets will have integrity and can grow in a proper manner. I think it's best that we're engaged now, better now than later, right? And when I think about regulated markets versus unregulated markets, regulated markets, you create a level playing field in a marketplace without creating too many barriers to entry or costs for participants. You're creating a real opportunity for capital allocation, investment, and the development of any marketplace. And I think, that I have a pretty strong feeling that any of our registrants would say something along those lines. Now, there's a lot in there, right? We have to make sure that we make these markets cost effective and efficient. But if we're truly trying to meet, 2050 targets and different other goals, the VCM market's going to be a critical space to develop and scale, and having a clear, regulated, transparent market, I think, is going to increase capital allocation and increase the scale of the markets. And naturally, I was talking earlier, I know a lot of these credits get retired immediately, but there will be a secondary market that develops. We're obviously seeing a lot of price fluctuation in carbon over the past year, given the Ukraine crisis and how energy markets reacted. But I do think, going back to what I said earlier, the fact of the matter is we have listed futures on carbon offsets. This pulls us in directly that we have to be monitoring these underlying markets. And given the concerns around integrity, I can't stand back just because the market's small. We have a lot of people, we have a lot of talented people. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we want to make sure that we're being comprehensive. But the second a contract gets listed on our markets, we have a regulatory interest to make sure that it's fair, transparent, and working as intended.
Well, that raises the issue of, you mentioned regulated versus unregulated markets, and also commenting on the VCM. How do we broadly think of it in terms of the voluntary versus the compliance markets? From your vantage point, how do you view a compliance carbon market as compared to a voluntary carbon market? And what's your are there different concerns or different issues you address, or is one fundamentally more important than the other?
I won't opine necessarily on one being more important than the other, but knowing what we have here in the U.S. with RGGI and Western Climate Initiative and other, growing sort of state-level markets, knowing what we have in Europe with the ETS and that cap-and-trade program. I know there were efforts 15, 20 years ago around a cap-and-trade program in the U.S., but these are regionally regulated markets. They're operating well. We have listed futures on those markets, at least listed futures that reference those markets. But from my vantage point, without, again, picking one or the other. It really is about ensuring transparency, ensuring integrity, and the VCM space is really the one that is a cause for concern, in my view, from a regulator standpoint, right? I'm purely speaking about my responsibility as a regulator, having these contracts listed on my exchanges and making sure that the underlying reference contracts are fair, credible, and transparent. And that's really sort of where I need to stop my sort of judgment and my value judgment about what's right, what's wrong, and what's preferred.
Great. We have time for one more question. You serve as the co-chair of the IOSCO Sustainable Task Force on Carbon Markets Working Group with Verena Ross, chair of the European Securities and Markets Authority. Can you give us a brief description of that work?
Yeah, so Verena, as you mentioned, runs the European Securities Market Authority, and we broke up into two work streams. We're trying to come up with principles essentially around both the compliance markets and the voluntary carbon market. So Verena is leading a work stream on compliance markets. This obviously has a much closer genesis to her being from Europe and seeing those markets quite mature at this point. And then I'm focusing on the voluntary carbon market side. And it really is an effort to sort of build off of a lot of the public-private partnerships and the private sector initiatives that have already been going on for quite some time, thinking about ICVCM and a lot of the work that you all are doing. But really, what can we do from an official sector standpoint to start to set the stage for what we expect out of market structure and market regulations and principles that would exist in a market? And this is in part because of what I said at the onset, a lot of demand from stakeholders who want to see some standards and some best practices being advocated and supported by a government agency, but also, again, repeating myself now with the fact that we're starting to see private investors wanting to see contracts where they can manage risk, where they can discover prices, and they can allocate capital and get exposure to different markets in the renewable space. It forces us to be involved, which is a positive thing. And really the goal is to be, again, consensus driven, add value, and to help these markets be transparent and hopefully scale, as I'm sure we all want to see over the next few decades.
Great. Chairman Behnam, I want to thank you for coming to NACW. We really appreciate the time. We, of course, have an open invitation every year that we hold it. But again, thank you for your participation. Please join me in giving a round of applause to Chairman Behnam.